and welcome back to our weekly Wednesday discussion where we are going over the book, The Autobiography of Malcolm X. We are now on chapter 8, titled Trapped. And so basically, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, every week a different speaker is going over a chapter of the autobiography of Malcolm X in order for us to derive lessons from the life of arguably one of the most, if not the most influential African-American Muslim in our in recent history. And so we are now on chapter 8 titled Trapped, which picks up right where chapter 7 left off, where Malcolm was visiting his friend Sammy the Pimp and found out that West Indian Archie, a character that we were introduced to a few chapters back, was looking for him. Now, this chapter is a very short chapter, and it's probably not going to take that long for me to summarize it. But despite it being somewhat brief, it's also a very powerful chapter because this chapter not only continues the flow or the rhythm that each of the recent chapters have been going, becoming a little bit darker and darker in tone. This chapter kind of introduces us to a new side of Malcolm, the side of Malcolm which shows his vulnerability and his feeling of helplessness to a certain extent. So very, very powerful chapter. So I'm just going to highlight some of the main points of this chapter. So like I mentioned before, it starts with the last one left off. Malcolm is with his friend, Sammy the Pimp, and West Indian Archie comes at the door looking for Malcolm. Basically, he believed that Malcolm, as Malcolm puts it, hyped him, basically hyping in this context, meaning, kind of tricked him or outsmarted him when it came to the calculations he was giving him for his betting numbers, the betting cards. And so Archie felt that Malcolm played him and was looking to get his money back. He was threatening Malcolm, telling him he wanted his money back. And at first, Malcolm really had no idea what was going on and told him that he didn't really have any money to give him at that time. And Archie told him that he had till next day at noon to give him his money back. And from there, Malcolm kind of describes the structure or system of hustlers at that time. And as Malcolm described in previous chapters, we know that West Indian Archie is an OG, as the saying goes, someone who has a lot of rep in Harlem, someone who is feared and respected, and someone who is known that you do not mess with, right? So, and he mentions in this chapter how just terrified he was that someone of this stature had it out for him, and it just really put him on this level of just being very cognizant and aware of his surroundings, just very, very tense. And he just starts kind of thinking to himself about what possibly could be going on. Again, just showing us just how calculating Malcolm was. He just kept thinking about what are some of the different factors that could be causing these issues events to start, because Malcolm makes it clear in this chapter he was not intentionally trying to screw over West Indian Archie with the numbers he calculated. He thought he calculated those numbers correctly, and he was very sure about it. He even mentioned in this chapter how when there's many of us I think I have experienced, there's times where you're sure you did something until someone points out and says, no, you didn't do that thing, then you second guess yourself. We all have had that feeling before. We're like, I did this task, or I got this paper done, and my teacher tells me, hey, I didn't get that paper from you, but you could have sworn that you did it, so you start second guessing yourself. This was kind of the same mindset that Malcolm had, because he was very sure that he didn't screw West Indian Archie over, but West Indian Archie was very insistent that Malcolm owed him this money, and he screwed him over, causing him to second guess himself. And he even started thinking that perhaps maybe West Indian Archie was he was actually the one possibly trying to outsmart Malcolm, and he mentions how some of the older hustlers would sometimes do these types of actions in order to kind of put the younger ones in their place and kind of bring down the competition, so to speak. So that popped in Malcolm's mind that perhaps West Indian Archie was trying to force Malcolm out of town in order to eliminate the competition. So all these different thoughts were coming into Malcolm's head, further increasing his tension and his paranoia, right? And he describes how an incident when he was at the bar, West Indian Archie comes in and starts threatening Malcolm, starts cursing Malcolm, and Malcolm was even contemplating killing him. He was contemplating that the only way out of this situation was to kill him. And he mentions how he never killed anyone before, but those around him and he himself knew that he had it in him. And it just kind of really highlights the seriousness of the situation, that he was seriously contemplating killing West Indian Archie in order to save himself. And West Indian Archie mentions something to him, which is somewhat profound. And he basically tells Malcolm that, you're a young guy. You have everything to lose. Me, I'm an old man. I'm 60 years old. You kill me, my life is already over. But at the same time, if you kill me, all that's left for you is jail. You're going to jail. You're going to lose everything. And so kind of using logic to kind of make Malcolm second guess what he was contemplating. And on top of that, Malcolm starts to describe that he was starting to indulge himself more in drug use, the use of opioids, marijuana, benzene, and all these other types of drugs in order to kind of keep himself sane, so to speak. And he was trying his best to live his life as he has been for the past few years, as if nothing was wrong, in order to kind of project strength and project that he was not letting these threats get the best of him. But it was all just kind of crumbling down, because we know that the Italian mob from the last chapter, they had it out for him. He describes an event that he got into a fight with a younger hustler who also had it out for Malcolm. And of course, West Indian Archie had it out for Malcolm as well. So all these different circumstances coming onto Malcolm's shoulders were starting to get to him. And he's really starting to indulge himself in drug use in order to keep himself sane. And he kind of describes just how out of it he became from using all of these drugs. Now he would basically he lost all sense of time. And he described how 5 minutes would feel like 5 weeks sometimes, and five days will feel like, 5 hours. And he just lost a complete sense of time, right? And he even describes a time where he was confronted by a police officer trying to catch a gun on him. He was, as usual, pretty slick about it. He managed to give his gun to another hustler before the cop searched him, and even that cop was telling him, Red, as we know that Red was his title, his nickname during his time in Harlem, that he should skip town. And the pressure was just getting to him. And this chapter really just kind of highlights for us that at this point in the book, this is like the darkest time for Malcolm. And it basically ends with an old friend of his from Boston, Shorty, coming to pick him up. So basically his friend, Sammy the Pimp, actually messaged for Shorty to come all the way from Boston to New York in order to get Malcolm out of this situation, because this situation was just becoming unavoidable for Malcolm. And that's why, hence why the title of this chapter is Trapped. He felt trapped, and he kind of describes how, before his friend Shorty came to pick him up, he describes how basically he felt that all these close calls that he was able to avoid during his years in Harlem. All those times he got lucky, or when God was looking out for him, it was all accumulating, and now everything has kind of reached a conclusion. All his close calls are now catching up to him, and so he just felt so um, trapped and so just suffocated, right? And his friend, like I mentioned previously, his friend Shorty came to pick him up, and of course Malcolm was just very, very excited and relieved that he was able to finally leave this situation. So he did indeed go with Shorty back to Boston, and that's where the chapter ends. But also, just kind of real quick to highlight that he talks about how when he heard his friend Shorty honk the horn, he almost shot him. He was just that on edge because he didn't know who it was. He didn't know who it was him. He was just that on edge about the situation that he was in, and he was just always high, always on drugs, but able to see his old friend and was able to get him out of that situation and bring him back to Boston. And that's again where I said the chapter ends. Very short chapter, but again, just very powerful. We get to see a side of Malcolm that we have not yet seen in these few chapters. Each and every chapter, Malcolm always found a way to get out of it, right? Malcolm always was able to overcome these different issues and challenges that were given to him. But this chapter shows us another side where these are situations that he was just not able to avoid by himself, and just how it caused him to just completely lose himself in drug use, just in order to stay sane from the situation. So very interesting perspective, I think, for us to learn and reflect from. So we'll go ahead and stop the live stream here, and then we'll open the floor for discussion on the Zoom meeting, inshallah. Those of you who are watching through Facebook Live or YouTube Live, inshallah, we'll see you all next week. Assalamu